Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Match Day. I hope everyone watching is healthy, still healthy and safe. And with us today, by the way, this is the 38th episode of Match Day since we started this after the isolation period. But with us today, special guest from another sport, and his name's Ben Chase, and he is one of the assistant coaches from West Point. And for basketball, for the women's basketball team. And he's going to talk a little bit about the teaching games for understanding model, how he uses it in basketball, and we can talk about maybe how we can apply it in our sport of soccer. So thank you, Ben, very much for coming and being on, and really looking forward to this presentation. So thank you.
Awesome, Vince. Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Good. So maybe tell us about your journey real quick, just where you got to where you are, and then a little bit about what Ian talked about, like how did you kind of get motivated to use this method?
Yeah, cool. So I've been playing basketball my whole life. I played at a small Division III school in Boston, Massachusetts, and in my time playing, I realized, I got bitten by the coaching bug and knew this is what I wanted to do. And so I graduated in 2008, and then I've kind of been coaching ever since. So I started out, I spent a couple of years at my alma mater at the Division III level, and then had the chance I got my master's at Boston University, had a chance to be a graduate assistant with the men's basketball team there for a year. Had a cool experience. The team was really good. We ended up making the NCAA tournament and got a 16 seed and got to go play Kansas and Oklahoma in the first round, which was quite an experience.
Wow.
But yeah, then after graduating, I got a job at Houston Baptist University, the smallest Division I school in the country. And I worked with their men's team as their kind of administrative guy for 2 years. And then a spot opened up on the women's side. And at that point, I hadn't really thought about coaching women, but the head coach convinced me I should, she thought I'd be good at it and convinced me to give it a shot. And I loved it. And I've been coaching on the women's side ever since. So I spent another 3 years coaching at the women's side in Houston before coming back up to the Northeast and got a job at Boston University for 2 years. And then I made the transition over to Army West Point, where I've been at for the last 2 years now. As far as teaching games for understanding, my first year at West Point, we practiced in a traditional practice model. A lot of plays and drills, standard practice. And then in the off season, I had a friend who I'd known had been working in the teaching games for understanding model, doing a lot of small sided stuff. Got a chance to go out and watch him run workouts with some of his players in May. And I thought I'd bring back a drill or two and, maybe be able to incorporate something that would help increase our players' IQs. But what I realized when I got out there was if you want to teach decision-making, it has to be a foundational approach. And after 3 days of watching what he was doing, I was completely sold on it. And I said, we have to do this. And I'm fortunate I worked with a bunch of folks who, when I presented it, agreed with me and were willing to go about it in that way. So yeah. And then this past year was our first year using the small-sided games practice framework. And it was super positive in so many ways that I imagine we'll get into over the course of the webinar.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, and we were sharing before we came on. Obviously, I live in Indianapolis. My dad grew up down the street from Oscar Robertson. So basketball is in my blood. It's in my DNA. And the reason why I got really excited that you were coming on is because for me, basketball and soccer are very similar with regard to principles of play, attacking, defending concepts, and all that. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit? Maybe how you see some of the basketball principles relate to our sport?
Oh, totally. So I love soccer. I grew up playing soccer too. Soccer and basketball were my two sports. So I think I'm excited in the same way that you are to be able to talk about it a little bit. But both sports being invasion games where there's consistent flow of play and players have really ideally, right? Offensively, you're looking to create space. You're looking to find space and be able to maximize it. Defensively, you want to clog it up and slow everything down. So I think there's some real clear translation stuff, and then just the way you share the ball between teammates and everybody kind of moves in unison. I think there's so many variables, and when we're talking about player development in both sports, what we really want to create are adaptive players who, I guess basically we as coaches can't set up everything that our players are going to see on a given play. There are so many variables. It's really an infinite number of things that can happen based on, how the 11 players on each team move at a given time in soccer. So us as coaches, to create the most effective players, we need to create agents of chaos, folks who can kind of cut through the noise and find ways to make things happen. And it's the same way in basketball.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Fritz Edel, made a comment that, I was on a Final Four bench as an assistant coach, but in Indiana, I was the JV basketball coach.
Awesome.
The head coach. It was a pretty cool experience, but nothing like what you experienced, dealing with Kansas, right, as a 16th seed. So
yeah, hearing 16,000 folks do the Rock Chalk Jayhawk thing is a little bit more intimidating in person.
Fantastic. So let's talk about some of the methods that go into TGFU. Like you talked about invasion games. What other types of games relate to this method? And then we can talk about maybe show an example what you did, what you've done.
Sure. So I think before we get to the how, I think just some of the principles of the format, you really want to include as many players as possible. So for us, the small-sided games really gave us the vehicle to do that. So for example, when we were practicing in a traditional model, we did a ton of 5-on-5, and our team had 15 players that season. So we'd have 10 players on the court, and then we'd have 5 players on the sideline doing nothing. We also have a male practice player squad. So when we were going against the practice players, we'd have 5 players participating and 10 players on the sidelines doing nothing. In this small-sided game practice framework, what we would do is try and get the numbers to the point where everyone is we don't call them drills anymore. We call them situations. You'd have some situations where, it's high intensity anaerobic stuff like transition, continuous, small-sided 2-on-2, 3-on-3, where you kind of they need a little bit of a blow afterwards before they go again. But if we're playing 3-on-3 in the half court, what we're trying to do is, if let's say we have 15 players on our team, we want to have 2 ends going of our players playing against each other. And then the odds and ends and the leftovers, we try and incorporate our male practice players. So, we can get a third basket going and nobody's standing there not being able to participate. So maximizing inclusion is one. Right in kind of in tandem with that is, I think, at least at our level, fun is incredibly undervalued. That was really reinforced to me this year. I think our players played harder this year than they have in the past because they enjoyed coming to practice every day. They knew we weren't going to do drills that maybe didn't translate directly to how we were going to play. They knew we were coming in, we were going to compete, and all they had to do was come and give their best effort, and we were going to support them and help them get better through that. So those were kind of like pivotal shifts that made a difference for us. But then in terms of the technical, in this format, instead of doing traditional drills, you're trying to improve in the same areas that you need to improve upon using constraints in these small-sided games. So, for example, for us, we had a lot of players at the beginning of the year who were not great technical passers. The ball wouldn't go exactly where it needed to go all the time. We would miss opportunities because, they weren't throwing a precision pass. On teams that I played in, or teams that I coached on earlier in my career, we might warm up with 2 people stationary across working on a technical chest pass or working on a technical bounce pass. But never in the history of the game of basketball have 2 players stood in the same place and thrown passes back and forth to each other. Yep. So the idea of this small-sided games framework is be okay with them not being good at it, but put them in those real situations and let them play live and develop it live. So now we're playing 3-on-3, and we play no dribble game every day. And so no dribble game forces you to work on cutting really hard and accurate passing, because if your pass is a little bit behind, the defender is going to catch up and you're not going to be able to get a shot off. And we saw throughout the course of the year, our players improved their technical passing much more than they had in previous seasons, because we were putting in that live setting that really translated to the actual games.
Yeah, no, that's great. You mentioned fun and obviously inclusion, but there's a lot of pieces there. For example, the 3-on-3, no, and I read that in a Bob Knight book, believe it or not. He used to do that no dribbling 3-on-3, because his teams were really known for cutting and moving and screens and all that. And then, but and I equate it to soccer. For me, it'd be like playing 1 or 2 touch 3-on-3 to goals, right? So because the passes and the touch has to be right, otherwise you're not going to advance the ball. So, Coach Barker, feel free to chime in. It looks like
I was just responding to the gentleman who's having a tough time getting his friend in, but to Dariush, we are recording this too. So if Brad doesn't get into the room, we will provide the recording on the website. So,
no, by the way, this is fascinating, and everything you're saying, like you've never seen 2 players, static, right? Just wrists out, and I mean, I am disappointed that you didn't mention the 3-man weave at the beginning. We did that every day for 50 layups.
Yep.
We missed on the 49th. We had to start all over. But you're right. And in soccer, I know we try and do the best we can to make sure that everything's not static and everything is movement, and it's all about movement education. We were going to talk about maybe an example practice plan that you have in basketball. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about how we do it in soccer. So do you want to share your screen? Do you want to?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So I think it's wonderful. It's fascinating.
And Vince, let's make sure we ask Ian McCallum's question at the end of the session. It's a great question.
Yep, we will.
Awesome. So can you guys all see my my screen? So one of the things that we tried to do at the beginning was just to develop engagement. It was kind of counterintuitive to the way that we'd done things in the past. You think you kind of warm up slow and get into it, but we would try and play a game right off the beginning. So, and a lot of times we'd play 3-on-3 or 4-on-4, and we'd say, so at the top, it's observational time for coaches. So we had 4 teams playing at 2 different baskets, and during this time, the coaches weren't giving any feedback. So we would walk around and we would observe and we would write down, the things we were noticing that we needed to work on. So that was a really valuable time for us, just in terms of like not interacting with the players gave us that feedback of, okay, as we're going through this practice and setting up practices in the future, these are the concepts that we're struggling with the most. And then the daily emphasis, that 1 minute at the top, that was us talking to the team and saying, these are the things that we had identified before. And then if we noticed anything during that initial tactical game, we would throw that in there also. The auto turnovers, that was the way we kept practice flowing. We wanted as much time, we wanted the kids playing as much as possible and us talking as little as possible, if that makes sense. So one of our principles that we play with is we want to rip away from the pass unless the defense is anticipating jumping that way and leaving us the space backwards. So anytime one of our players caught and went back to where the space wasn't, we were blowing the whistle, automatic turnover, other team takes the ball, no more talking, we're still playing. And it was the same for all those other things that we talked about right there. Make the read, that was us breaking down just, kind of 3-on-0, or we'd have dummy defense in there. So we were working on, our general movement. And then moving into the random shooting, that was like kind of the only shooting drill we would do, but we called it random because it was multiple players playing together. And so they still had to make decisions and move based on our principles and where the ball would go. Typically we'd have 2 passes and a shot. And all of that was building up into our advantage game. So advantage is one of the situations that we would always use. So in advantage, we would place the on-ball defender about a half step behind the player with the ball. Okay. So we'd create an advantage opportunity on offense. And what the advantage would do is let everyone else on the floor analyze the space. And when the coach blew the whistle, everyone was playing, but all the off-ball players in an advantage situation have an idea of where they're supposed to go before we start. So it kind of gives them that extra time to make the decision. The blind advantage that we would go to next, in that situation, we put the defender in front of the player with the ball. And so now the player with the ball can go to the right or can go to the left. And so all of those players who are off the ball, they have to read in real time and adjust based on our principles, whether we're going right or whether we're going left in real time. So it's like a build-up. So advantage, in advance. Blind advantage, you have to make your decision on the spot. And then that dunker spot, we play a positionless offense. So everyone's kind of moving all over the place. It doesn't matter who you are, what position you are. The dunker spot, we were really emphasizing working on that baseline spot. So we played no dribble games, and I think we put in some additional bonus points if you hit the dunker, or you couldn't score until you hit the dunker spot. We kicked out and played out of the dunker spot, or bonus points if you hit the dunker. And then we went into defense, and the defense stuff at this point in the season, we hadn't really got into using the framework for defense. It was mostly offense, but yeah, those are kind of general examples of situations that we would use. We had another one we called space read game, where it was set up the same way as advantage, but we made the ball handler and the on-ball defender both close their eyes, and everyone on the floor, we'd make them move around to different spots. So then on the coach's whistle, everyone opens their eyes and they have to make decisions based off of, in real time, analyzing where everyone is and where the space is. And then we do a lot of transition stuff too, continuous transition, where, our constraints and small-sided stuff is still being played. So a lot of 2-on-2, 3-on-3 transition stuff.
Yeah, no, this is great. And by the way, the level of detail, right? Down to the minute, that's wooden-like, down to the minute. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's no wasted time. There's a lot in here that when I coach basketball, I used to do like 3v3 small-sided games. I'd play dribble knockout, right? Everyone would have a ball and we try to knock each other's ball out. So I tried a lot of times to take some of the soccer ideas that I used as a coach back in the 90s when I coached basketball and soccer to basketball practice. Like we played moving horse, right? So you always had to be moving, right?
I like that. Yeah. I might have to steal that for next year.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. Every now and again I have one. So we have a couple questions, and like the part about the dunker where they got to hit the dunker, for me, that would be equivalent to if a team's attacking a large goal, they got to hit the center striker first before, right, they can kind of get a shot off, right? So in other words, that player is like a pivot, if you will, that helps set other teammates up. So a lot of soccer ideas in that basketball lesson plan that I see, because I can conceptualize the game, basketball and soccer really easily. So go ahead, Ian Barker. Go ahead and ask Ian McCallum questions.
Yeah, I will. I'll just share one very quick insight. I have a ton of situational type games and TGFU games we've been using in soccer since we started learning about it that really mirror what's here. I had an All-American New Zealand player play for me at McAllister, and whatever activity I came up with, he would find a way of breaking it, if you will. He would find a wrinkle. And so I started to really have to develop my games for understanding, because if I had this higher level athlete who could pull the thread and undo them. So if the conditions were not logical, he would break the game. So it's good if you've got good athletes who enjoy these activities, because they challenge you to revise them. The quick question, Ben, from a friend of ours in Seattle, Ian, as an assistant, how difficult was it for you to sell the concept to the head coach? And then what was the level of buy-in from the athletes initially?
Great question. And it was very challenging to get my head coach on board with this, because he's been a head coach for over 40 years, and he's been very successful both on the men's and women's side at Division I college basketball. So I think to date, he's the only head coach at Division I who has over 250 wins on the men's side and over 250 wins on the women's side in his career. And he'd done things his way. You know, it was kind of tough, gritty, slow it down, grind it out. But we had a different type of team than he'd ever had before. And, you know, with this teaching games for understanding type practice framework, we also had, I sold it kind of alongside an analytics-based positionless offense approach, which is getting more popular in basketball. So I really talked more about the offense when I was selling him on it. And I think it was clearer for him to see how our team would operate better within that analytics-based offense. And then, you know, but the whole time I was saying, but I really think the crux of this whole thing is the practice framework. I think that's more important than what the offense is itself. I think we're going to see more growth. I think we're going to see more development, and it's going to be different, and it's going to be, you know, uncomfortable for us. And I think he deserves a ton of credit, because I don't know many coaches who had his level of experience and success who would be willing to change everything at this point in his career because he saw it as a better fit for the athletes that we had. And I think as time went on, like, part of the hardest part of this too, right, is every time it starts to look good, you have to up your constraints and make it look sloppy again. So every time your players start to master what you're putting in front of them, that means it's time to grow. And I think, you know, early in the season, like, our team was young. We weren't very good to begin with. Expectations were low. I think we were picked to come in last in our league in the preseason poll. And so we turned the ball over a ton in practice as we were getting familiar with everything. And then we would also turn the ball over a ton in the games once we started playing games. And, like, it made sense, like, right? Like, you're doing poorly in practice. Those same things transition into competition. But what really started to change was as the season went on and we started to get better, when we started to up the level of challenge and up the constraints in practice, while it would still be sloppy and it still wouldn't look good, when we get into the game, it would actually be easier. And by that point, once it was easier, our turnovers went down. We were much more competitive. Our last 7 games of the season, we played each of the top 4 teams in the conference during that span. We went 4-3. And against, you know, in some of the games we lost, we were, you know, single digits against, you know, the number 2 and number 4 team in the conference when we lost to them. So from where we started to where we finished, we saw a drastic level of improvement. And I think, you know, if you ask my head coach at this point, you know, are you sold on it? He'd say 100%. Like, this is great. We're definitely sticking with it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And your pal Fritz, he basically is asking, and you did a little bit talk about how you can embed conditioning with some of these game-like situations.
Yeah. So the biggest things for conditioning are, it's a maybe perceived disadvantage that I think actually became an advantage for us this season. Everything's so structured at the military academy that we only have a 2-hour window for everything we want to do every day. So we don't have the luxury that some other coaches at our level have of, you know, just letting practice roll on for 3.5, 4 hours if you don't get to everything you want to do. And we were already in that mindset going into this year, but we want our practices to be relatively short, but super high intensity. So we don't want a lot of lag time between the different situations that we do. We want to zip from one to the next, have our kids grab water in the limited amount of time that they have in between. And then we have a few situations that we know are real burners that we can put in there that are going to get them. So if we want them to really work out, we'll go. So we have 6 hoops in our gym. We'll go. We'll cut it sideways and go on the 2 full courts that go sideways. And we'll go 2-on-2 full court continuous transition. So our rule for that is you have to play defense twice before you sub out and the next 2 people come on. And so when you're playing 2-on-2, like, one of our principles is you can't consecutive drive. So if one person drives into the paint and kicks, the next person has to either shoot or pass. So if you drive into the paint in 2-on-2 consecutive transition, and you kick out and your teammate doesn't have a shot, you better be busting it to get back out to that perimeter, because you're the only one who has the freedom to move. So, if we do that, we don't do it for a super long period of time, and they do get a good amount of rest in between their reps going up and back. But that's one that we saw, and really, like, everyone gets in good shape because everyone's playing all the time. So you have to be on it as a coach. You can't let your water break, extend from 1 minute to 3 minutes,
right.
Or if you're going to stop and shoot free throws, you really want to tamp down the amount of time that they're doing that. So you're controlling it. I would say it's more important in the preseason if you're trying to build up your conditioning. But, our kids were dead at the end of pretty much when we started doing this in basketball. We're allowed to have 4 hours of on-court instruction in what's considered our off season. So when our kids come back, we give them 2 weeks to adjust to the school year. But once we start doing basketball workouts, we would do 4 1-hour workouts, throughout the course of the preseason. They were gassed at the end of every one of those 1-hour sessions.
Yeah, no, I remember years ago as a high school kid at IU, Coach Knight invited any high school that wanted to come, and just watching those guys do it. And that was back in the 80s, right? They were everything was moving, everything. I mean, water breaks were timed. I mean, it was boom. It was, I was like, oh my goodness. So I can only imagine now, right? And then now we use, for example, 2v2 or 2-on-2 cross court, which that's quite a bit, right? It's a length. But I love the idea of, you can only, after you defend twice, you're out, right? So you get maximum performance out of them. And then the idea of that they can't drive consecutively twice. So just those little twists, I think, can really translate into what we do. So
the other thing that really works with that too is the automatic turnovers. Just being able to blow the whistle and say consecutive drive, turnover, go the other way. Like your instruction doesn't impede the flow.
Yeah. No, it's great. So we've gone over time, taking enough of your time. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. And this was outstanding. And just the information you provided, taking your time away from your family and your best team, and with this is wonderful. And Coach Barker, anything to end with?
No, Ben, that was fantastic. We'll put this up as a recording and make sure that it gets circulated out. So our YouTube page carries it, and it usually gets several hundred views. So I'm really grateful that you're willing to share this. And please pass along our best wishes to your head coach and tell him that we respect how much you respected his willingness to change. I mean, if he's that accomplished a head coach, that's a hell of an achievement. You've sold him on something and he was open-minded. That's a really good story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't be more grateful to him. And thank you guys. I'll throw my email in the comment section afterwards. If any of you guys have other questions, I'm happy to follow up. I love teaching games for understanding the small-sided games framework. It was awesome for us. Happy to help you guys if there are any other questions you have.
Thank you so much. And if I get questions, is it okay if I forward them to you to answer?
Yeah, please do. Happy to.
Thank you so much. And thank everybody. And hopefully we'll see some of you on 4:00 Eastern time. And it should be quite a show. So that's all I'm going to leave it at. So thank you all so much. And God bless. Stay safe. Thanks again, Ben.